everyone, my name is Joseina de Leon, and today I will be talking to you about my personality development. As we've been learning throughout the semester, personality is constantly changing, adapting to a person's environment while still remaining influenced by factors like the individual's personal narrative, upbringing, and culture. Of course, there's things that happen in life that can lead someone to change their personality to a certain extent, but an individual will always have that influence from things like that I mentioned before, like their personal narrative, upbringing, and culture. There's nothing that has happened in my life that has, as of yet, that has caused my personality to shift. My personal narrative, upbringing, and culture still remain a very strong influence on my personality. The goal of this project is to give the reader or watcher, in this case, an understanding of my personality development using topics that were covered during the semester while also using outside research. So, as we've learned throughout the semester, the development of personality is influenced by genetic and environmental factors. But according to an article that I found on the database called Understanding Personality Development, yeah, they found that genetics and environmental factors do have a huge influence on our personality development. But we should also keep in mind that life events and our role in society does play a huge part in our personality, in the way that our personality unfolds and develops. So, just a bit of background information. I'm 23 years old. I'm from the Bronx, New York. I've always lived here, but my parents are from the Dominican Republic. I'm an only child. It's very interesting being an only child because everyone always asks me, like, why? I mean, do you like it? Like, you're lucky you don't have any, like, siblings, like, bugging you, or, like, oh my God, you must be so spoiled. But it gets a bit lonely at times, and it's interesting to say the least. It definitely has its um, ups and downs. And I also identify myself as an introvert. So, just a little refresher. We touched upon the topic of personal narrative earlier in the semester, and it's basically how the self tells the story of their life. In the textbook, it defines it as an individual's internalized, involving, and integrative story of the self. Um, People begin to construct their personal narratives in adolescence and continue to expand it during their adult life. Um, and basically, people create an autobiographical storehouse um, type of thing in our mind, made of life periods, general events, and event specific knowledge. And also, our personal narrative also includes our past, present, and envisioned future. So looking back, I always had issues with storytelling when I was younger because I had insecurities thinking that no one would want to hear them. I've always been an introvert and shy and basically to myself all the time. This affected the way that I expressed my experiences to people the very few times that I even tried to tell them. This was partly due to me always being shut out of conversation and being cut off when I was speaking, like during middle school and high school, I was talking to friends. I'm sure that most people didn't do it on purpose, but it just took its toll on me when I was adolescence. When I was an adolescent, caring about what people thought of me. Um, I remember that there were friends actually that got mad at me because I supposedly didn't tell them anything about myself. But when in reality I did try, they just didn't care to listen. um, and, but I grew out of that and I'm very grateful that I grew out of that mindset and those people, and that I am now more open to telling my personal narrative. Also, something else that we touched upon in this semester, when telling stories, people often switch the way that they tell it from dramatic mode to reflective mode, according to our course textbook. In dramatic mode, the storyteller uses frequent use of nonverbal signals. They employ vivid quotes and dialogue and attempt to reenact the original event in the telling. Um, in reflective mode, the storyteller spends a little bit more time describing how the event went and how it meant to them, and reflecting on what it means to them at the moment, and also how it made them feel. Reflective modes effectively communicate more information, while dramatic mode basically makes more sense when the person's talking and sharing like an intimate, not intimate, but an entertaining story that would just seem more effective told dramatically. So, how do I tell my stories? So, when speaking to a family member or a friend, I often tell stories in a dramatic way, depending on the context. I do this to get a certain reaction from them, whether it be a laugh or a dramatic reaction back. When talking to someone like a coworker, or a teacher, or supervisor, I tend to tell stories in a reflective way, but it also depends on the context. Um, I do this to reflect on what happens throughout the day or the week at work with a coworker. I do this with a teacher to reflect on what I know and what I have learned during their course. When it comes to close friends and even my significant other, I tend to tell stories in both a dramatic and reflective way because I feel comfortable enough to do that with them. So, another article that I found on the database mentioned that meaning making, as in like meaning making for your personal narrative, is very important when during the transition to college as adolescents, because at that time the adolescent is trying to learn how to communicate in a new environment. So using that and reflecting onto my transition to college, when talking about my first year in college, I often recognize that it wasn't a time of happiness for me, and and it really shaped the way that I express myself. At that time, I chose to stick to myself, and I just went to class and then would just go home straight after that, not having any significant interaction with people unless it was necessary. At the time, I found it very frustrating that my friends all went away for college and I stood in the city by myself when it was my dream to go away as well. It just didn't happen due to the circumstances at the moment. And it took me a while to accept that. So I did a lot of self reflecting at that time. So, according to our textbook, um, as people age, people's motivation, goals, personal concerns change. And also, the importance of certain events that happened in the past also change. People's autobiographical priorities change as well. Some events may increase in importance and some events might decrease. That's just what happens in life. So, for example, just like I was saying before about how I was very concerned about my friends going off to college and me staying in the city, that was a huge concern for me then. It isn't now because that time has passed. So the concerns that I had during my first year of college are not the same concerns that I have now. That is part of the development of personal narrative and of the personality. The more experiences that one goes through, the less they start to care about the things that they were once concerned about. In childhood, one was worried about whether or not someone wanted to share a toy with you. In adolescent, one was worried about whether or not someone liked you. As the year goes by and your narrative develops more, important things become unimportant. So as we learned during the beginning of the semester, is that parenting style does have an effect on personality development. Um, and parenting style can affect the way that someone regulates their emotions. To the right is a picture of me and my mom and my dad when I was probably like 4 or 5 in that picture. But anyways, my mom was and still is about expressing emotions, but only if it aligns with her beliefs. Um, my dad is the complete opposite. He does not express emotions at all, and that kind of has rubbed off on me. I often find myself doing the same. Um, they both have their own way of expressing that they care. My mom tends to show it through hugs and physical affection and favors. My dad tends to show it not more not lately, but like more when I was a kid. He would show it through material things. For example, he would lately he like still buys me flowers on Valentine's Day, but doesn't actually say Happy Valentine's Day to me, which I find super funny. Um, it makes me wonder how his personality came to be. Um, so basically, when I was growing up, both of them had a common way of how they would treat me. They were both very overprotective. This was due to me being an only child. Um, and also, I was their first child, and they didn't know any better. It was basically like the trial run. They just didn't get a second one. Um, and growing up, I was always the kid in my class that had the most overprotective parents. Um, and this caused a lot of anxiety in me when I was younger. And then I feel like, although they're not over protective of me now, I feel like that anxiety is still instilled in me in a very strong way. Um, yeah. So, helicopter parenting, for those of you who have heard of the term, is the perfect description for the parenting style that my parents used. Parenting, helicopter parenting has been found to have a negative effect on academic motivation. When I was little, any little upsetting thing that I told my mom relating to school, she would go and question the teacher about it. She made it seem like she could solve all my problems in school at that time. So I lacked the motivation to solve my own problems because I knew that she would do it for me, which is pretty bad. Um, so I lacked the motivation basically to solve my own problems at that time. Um, Helicopter parenting also has major implications towards mental health. Um, Growing up, I struggled finding independence. Um, and I know I don't resent my parents for using this parenting style because I knew they just wanted the best for me. Um, but whoever uses this parenting style and is aware of it, they should also be aware that it does not leave room for the child to become independent or someone separate from the parent. Um, and also, helicopter parenting increases one's dependency on others and shows the child ineffective coping skills. So to this day, I feel like my coping skills still were and still are not the greatest. I'm working hard every day to cope with things better. I suffer from anxiety because of this, and it has become a driving force in my personality. I find it extremely hard to make decisions without getting input sometimes. and get really anxious when little things happen that shouldn't really affect my mood. Um, but once again, I don't resent my parents at all for using this style. They did not know any better. I'm the first and only child, so it was only natural that they were overprotective because I was the only child that they have, basically. So the way that my parents raised me and my how my personality turned out is very much influenced by my culture. As I mentioned before, I was born here, but my parents are Dominican, and um, according to an article that I found, Latino families tend to empathize the importance of family togetherness, otherwise known as familismo. To the right, you can see a picture of probably just 10% of my family because my family is huge. Um, and the way that my family tends to do things is that if there's anything that happens, any small thing, a milestone, an accident, and future plans, it's discussed within the family. Like people will know what happens. Um, Family get-togethers happen a lot where everyone wants to know the details on everything in your life. Um, and something else that is very much something else from my culture that very much influences my personality is knowing both English and Spanish, which kind of makes me feel like I have two personalities. It definitely feels like I have the best of both worlds. Research shows that each language tends to activate behavioral expressions that tend to lean towards that language. Thus, it can create a shift in personality depending on the social context. Also, another study found that English and Spanish speaking individuals are more emotional when speaking Spanish, regardless of which one is their primary language. So, in conclusion, my personality is something that I'm very grateful for. I feel that it's, although I couldn't capture it completely in this paper or in this presentation, I feel like it's very complex and um, I can only partly explain it with this paper. Every day I learn to tell my narrative more, accepting that there are people who care. I recognize that the parenting style that my parents use has helped me grow into the person that I am today. My family, although sometimes very intrusive, helped shape who I am for the better. I am grateful for that. Being part of two different cultures and knowing two languages is not only beneficial for me in the social world, but essentially broadens my personality. Although learning to understand, speak, and write two languages growing up was confusing at times, I would not be able to imagine how my personality would be without knowing both of the languages. Um, but overall, looking at an individual's personality and how it came to be is an essential part of studying psychology. And I very much enjoyed um, this class. Um, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of their semester. And I wish you all the best on all of your finals. I hope to hear from you guys soon. Bye, good night, or good morning, wherever you are. Bye.